Hey, Faith Community Church. Mike Lawrence, lead pastor, one church, 3 locations. While you're watching this, I'm at Hopkinton preaching this message live, and Pastor Dorian is in Framingham preaching this message live. Whoa, the marvels of modern technology. Yeah, I am so glad you're with us this morning. So glad. Hey, I don't know what you thought. I loved Carly's video. Man, I just believe so much in faith groups, and she was so impactful to me personally. And I'm the lead pastor. My faith group is precious to me. Matter of fact, I don't lead my faith group. I've got a friend in our faith group who's been putting together the Bible studies. And man, they've been insightful and challenging to me. And I've been stealing parts of his stuff and putting them into my message. But it's okay, I got his permission. Thank you, Peter. All right. Hey, we're in a series called Give Me Peace. Now, I'm kind of a geek. I love all different studies and really like sociology and research, social research, kind of understanding people. Do you know that one of the biggest studies, longevity, of human nature has happened right out of Boston? It's called the Adult Development Study out of Harvard University. They have studied the lives of 724 men over 75 years. They included their wives in the study once they got married. And then they included their kids, like 2,000 kids, as they got further into the study. Half of the study was with Harvard students. The other half were with kids from some of the poorest neighborhoods of Boston. They were really trying to transcend some diversity, at least in terms of economy, economic class, right? Here is the key insight. After 75 years of studies, tens of thousands of written pages and hours of interviews, good relationships keep us happier and healthier throughout life and into the end of life. Good relationships keep us happier and healthier. Isn't that amazing? Out of all the things that they could have pulled out of this study, that was the key insight. And they talked about, this is a great TED Talk, by the way, and in this TED Talk, the new director of the study, because I think there's been like 4 or 5 of them throughout the course of the whole study, said they really isolated 3 main insights in relationship to that. First is that social connections are just really important. It is so important to have relationships. You're going to be happier, you're going to be physically healthier, and you're going to live longer the more relationships you have. Now, they're not just talking about marriage. They're talking about friends. They're talking about wider extended family. They're talking about involvement in the community through community activities like nonprofits or maybe town sports and in the workplace. Just the thoughtful creation of good relationships. So the first insight, social connections are important. You're going to be happier, healthier, and live longer if you have good relationships. But it's just not the number of friends. That's not what's important. It's the quality of the friendships that you have. They say that living in the midst of conflict is actually bad for your health. Having close, conflicted relationships with difficult people actually impacts your health, your mental well-being, and the longevity of your life. Good, warm relationships protect you. And then the third insight, that people in secure relationships, the type of relationships where I can count on you relationships, those people have better memory retention and less memory decline. Can you imagine that? They said, you know what? In some of their studies, they have marriages where people bicker, but they know underneath the bickering, I can count on this person. And they said those type of relationships not just give you security, but they actually affect your mental well-being. Isn't that amazing? That the quality of your life is impacted by the quality of your relationships. Difficult relationships are bad for your health, and they're bad for your mental well-being. I could have told them that without a 75-year study, but the study kind of helps, doesn't it? So how you doing? I mean, here we are. We're in a series called Give Me Peace. Because we're facing fearful conditions, we have difficult relationships, and we're managing unrealistic expectations. And for many of us, the last thing we feel is peace. But how you doing? Because difficult relationships aren't going to help. And I don't know about you, but I kind of think difficult relationships abound a little bit. I mean, have you had a discussion recently about COVID-19, the restrictions and wearing a mask? How's that for a conversation? I was almost thrown out of a meeting recently. Can you believe it? Not a church meeting, a community meeting. I didn't know the rules of engagement well, and somebody felt so threatened by my social distance, and I thought I was fine, and I had the mask, and I was trying to treat people respectfully. The person couldn't stand it, and he got the individuals running the meeting to come over and to talk to me. I was like, they could have talked to me. I would have respected their boundaries if they had struggles. I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. Or what about racism? Throw the phrase systemic racism into your next Zoom meeting and see how quickly people sign off. Or what about the presidential election? I was talking to somebody who told me he was chased down in his car. He was driving, another driver chased him down into a parking lot and started screaming at him for the presidential election bumper sticker on the back of his car. So how you doing? Got some difficult relationships? Hint, if your difficult relationship is in the room with you, don't tell them, all right? Let's let God speak to them about that. Don't we seem to have a lot of difficult relationships right now? I mean, in social media, in media of all forms, TV, shock radio, right? Podcast or news programs. Or how about just in your families, in your relationships, in your community? I think everybody can think of a difficult relationship when it comes to just those three issues, right? The COVID infection, racism, and the presidential election. Immediately somebody comes to mind. And maybe they are a family member and you're really struggling. God, how can I have peace because of this relationship and the stress that it's bringing into my life? You understand the study. That stress doesn't make you feel good, does it? Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read a passage from our Bible written by the Apostle Paul, one of the great leaders of the church. I mean, this guy established churches all over the Mediterranean world. And he wrote a letter to the Christians living in Rome. It's called Romans. And he's writing to them about relationships. So here's what to do. You could read along with me. We're going to have it here on the screen for a minute, but I'd encourage you, in the midst of watching this, pull out your Bible, or even better yet, if you download the Bible app onto your phone, you can pop open, and it's really easy to just go to Romans. And then the first number is going to be for chapter 12. And then the next number is going to be for verse 9, the little numbers in the sentences, right? And I'm going to read what's called the New Living Translation because the Bible's been translated into many English versions. So it might sound a little bit different than the one you're reading. The New Living Translation. Don't just pretend to love others. Really love them. Hate what is wrong. Hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with genuine affection. Take delight in honoring each other. Never be lazy, but work hard. Serve the Lord enthusiastically. Rejoice in our confident hope. Be patient in trouble and keep on praying. When God's people are in need, be ready to help them. Always be eager to practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Don't curse them. Pray that God will bless them. How's that? Be happy with those who are happy. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with each other. Don't be too proud to enjoy the company of ordinary people, and don't think you know it all. Never pay back evil with more evil. Do things in such a way that everyone can see that you are honorable. Do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. Dear friends, never take revenge. Leave that to the righteous anger of God. For the scriptures say, I will take revenge. I will pay them back, says the Lord. Instead, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals of shame on their heads. Don't let evil conquer you, but conquer evil by doing good. I tell you, and I often say this, the most difficult things in the Bible for me aren't the ones passages that I don't understand. The most difficult parts of the Bible for me are the things that are clear, that I fully understand, but I just have to apply to my life. And this is a difficult passage, especially in light of difficult relationships, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you 5 words to hang on to help you with this passage. 5 words to guide you in your relationships with people. And we're going to talk about how those words and this passage can work its way out in your relationships with difficult people. But to really do that well, I want to pray. So God, I'm coming to you right now, and I'm praying that you will use this experience to bless people by giving them wisdom, direction, insight, help. People need it. I need it, God, because I have difficult people in my life. So God, would you use this time to guide all of us, that we might stand out in this world as children of God. For Jesus has taught us, blessed are the peacemakers. They should be called the sons and daughters of God. And I want to be known as your son. Amen. So look at Paul, who wrote this, knew a lot about difficult people. Paul was maligned and slandered by people often. Paul had people disrespect his leadership and his spirituality. He would set up a church, go off to set up another church, and the first church that he set up, people would rise up and would challenge his leadership and try to change his teachings and diminish him as a person in his absence. People accused Paul of corrupting the faith. Can you imagine that? Do you know how that strikes a person who seeks to serve God with their life, to have somebody accuse them of not honoring God, not loving God, and not preaching the Bible correctly? People abused Paul physically. I mean, he got beaten up by people. And then people took advantage. He got imprisoned at one point for his faith. And while he's in jail, people are knocking down his reputation and diminishing him. So Paul had a lot of experience with difficult people. Take that into consideration, because I believe that when Paul writes a passage like this, I think he writes what he has learned from Jesus and the teachings of Jesus that he's applying to his life, that he tries to practice. He isn't always perfect, but he really tries hard to practice what he preaches. And I think when he writes something like this down, he really believes that we can live it, that we can practice it with the help of God. So let's pull this apart a little bit, take a look at those 5 words and kind of ask some questions about how we can deal with difficult people during these times. 5 words: devoted, generous, humble, empathetic, peaceful. So look at them again. They're on the screen. Devoted, generous, humble, empathetic, peaceful. Let's hang on to those 5 words. Let's use them like a filter as we read this passage, parts of this passage again, and think of how it might work its way out in our relationships. Think of the word devoted. Devoted is another word for love. It's a word that emphasizes the importance of really hanging in there with a person, not giving up on them, maybe even going the extra mile that other people would tell you you don't have to walk. You know that time, the devotion you may have to another individual, and people look at you like, are you sure? Where others might have given up, you choose to hang in longer. This is what he says when Paul says, this is what I think he means when Paul says, like in verse 9, don't just pretend to love others, really love them. Or in verse 10, he says, love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other. Take delight in honoring each other. Love each other with a genuine affection. Don't just put on airs. Don't just try to impress. Don't put on a facade. Genuinely love each other. He's talking about the relationships that are marked with genuine love and affection. And what I'm thinking about Paul here, Paul's not talking about just the people that you like. What we see as we pull a passage apart in its bigger context is Paul starts talking about people that you might call your enemies. And how can you love them? Jesus would talk about this. There was a teaching where Jesus says, what good is it if you love those that you like. I mean, people who don't even share our faith do that. But love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Devotion. Loving people you don't like. Loving people who may not be lovable, but genuinely loving them. That's a mark of someone who follows Jesus Christ. I want to take a look at all 5 of these words. We'll look at how they'll apply, and I'll give you some words of advice. But for now, let's just talk about what those words mean. Generous. This is verse 13. When God's people are in need, be ready to help them. Always be eager to practice hospitality. Hospitality in Paul's day was a huge thing. You were expected to open up your home to others and to bring them in and to treat them like family. Now, it's a little hard right now. Not impossible, but a little hard. I mean, maybe you can get together and have a cup of coffee with somebody or an outdoor meal if you're comfortable. What Paul is talking about is the generous spirit that goes out of its way to show kindness to somebody by opening up their life and allowing somebody to come into it. It's a generous spirit. What about humble? Verse 16, don't be proud. Don't be too proud to enjoy the company of ordinary people. And don't think you know it all. Are you a person who's known for just loving people, for being kind to everybody, for showing respect to all people? Are you a person who's known for his opinions or good questions? Are you known for patiently engaging in a conversation, or are you the woman who crashes into a conversation just to tell them what you think? In dealing with difficult relationships, humility goes a long way. Let me tell you something. If you're a difficult person, humility is probably the first word you should be working on. To open up your life and to listen to others before you share your opinion, to be kind and respectful to people you don't disagree with, and to treat everyone with respect. How about empathetic? So we've been devoted, we've been generous, we're being humble. How about being empathetic? Verse 15, be happy with those who are happy. Weep with those who weep. You know what empathy is? Empathy is the ability to feel someone else's pain, to be able to connect with them emotionally, to not drown in their emotions. Doesn't mean you agree with why they feel the way they feel, but it's just the ability to connect with how they're feeling. This is an important skill. I've learned this throughout life as I've loved on people who are struggling with issues of anxiety or fear or anger. I just try to understand, why do you feel this way? That's what empathy does. Empathy brings humility together, and they ask just a simple question: explain to me why you feel this way. Gaining the understanding of their position and their emotions to just know the why behind what they feel, as well as the what of what they feel. Again, it doesn't mean you have to agree, but it means you love them enough that you choose to understand how they're feeling. Be devoted. Be generous, be humble, be empathetic, and last, be peaceful. And this is a huge quality. Paul spends a lot of time talking about being peaceful. Verse 14, bless those who persecute you. Don't curse them. Here's amazing. Pray that God will bless them. Paul is talking about people who have persecuted him. And so when Paul writes this, what Paul is saying, the people who have put him in prison, he is praying that God will bless them. That is counterintuitive love. In verse 16, live in harmony with each other. Verse 17, never pay back evil with more evil. Right, that counteracts every superhero movie I've ever watched, right? But the idea is that for Christians, don't pay back evil with evil. Be different. Treat people differently. Well, look at the end of the passage. Do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. Dear friends, never take revenge. Leave that to the righteous anger of God. Paul's implying that God is the only one who has the right to be angry and knows when he should be angry. That sometimes our anger is misplaced, but God's isn't. The scriptures say, I will revenge. I will pay them back, says the Lord. It takes a lot of trust in God to believe that he will defend your injustices. Instead, this part is really astounding to me. If your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. In doing this, you'll heap burning coals of shame on their head. Do you hear what he's saying? Don't treat them the way that they treat you. Treat them the way they need to be treated, the way you wish you were treated, the way you would like to be treated. Give food to people who are hungry and give something to drink to those who are thirsty because they really need it. So these characteristics, devoted, generous, humble, empathetic, and peaceful, are to mark our relationships even with difficult people. And so I want to take a look about how we could do that for a minute. So there we are with our 5 words: devoted, generous, humble, empathetic, and peaceful. How does that apply? Well, think about some of the situations we're facing. Think of the coronavirus. We think about the spectrum of difficult relationships, right? You know, have you been on the side where if you're not wearing a mask, you're not walking the right way in the aisle, or you're standing too close, that people will treat you like you're just reckless and you don't care about anyone and you're the danger in society? Like, whoa. Or, have you been on the other side? You're talking with someone who's like, wearing a mask is silly. It's inconvenient. It's a compromise of my personal rights, and I think this whole thing is just a conspiracy anyways. Whoa. So here's a question in this passage. Because the minute I said that, I know I stoked up something inside of so many of us. And I know people came to mind and discussions came to mind, and you're kind of wondering about me now. But here's the question from this passage we just looked at. What is the most loving reaction? Think about that. What is the most loving reaction? So listen, you know what? I wear a mask. I don't wear it here on the camera, right? I'm walking around, I wear a mask. It's inconvenient. I don't like it, but I wear it. I don't want hospitals to be overrun. I don't want people to get sick. And you know what? I want people to feel at ease around me. And I don't look at it as my personal right. I look at it as my obligation to love. You know what? I come across somebody, I'm having a conversation, they're not wearing a mask. I don't judge them for having a lack of compassion. I just don't. If I think maybe we're in a place we should wear a mask, I'll gently suggest it, but it's a point where in peace, I got to let them live. They're not horrible people. Imagine if we could approach our relationships with peace and love. What about racism? On one side, you know, systemic racism is a lie. The liberal agenda undermines the stability of our society. On the other side of the spectrum, anyone who doesn't agree with me is wrong. You're either a racist bigot or you're a blind idiot. Okay, those are 2 rather fervent poles of opposition. Pick 3 words. What would it mean to be empathetic, generous, and peaceful? Empathetic and generous. I mean, when is the last time you sat down and just listened to somebody who disagreed with you? Just listened. This has been my journey. I've taken the time to listen to my friends who are black or people of color in our church. I just say, start with, tell me what you're feeling. Help me to understand so that I know the journey that you've experienced in our society. I mean, if we're told to rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn, I need to understand why they're mourning and where that mourning comes from. You know what I found? I have found that my heart will resonate with them. Again, you don't always have to agree with somebody, but choosing to listen, to understand why they feel the way they feel, that's a step of empathy and love for people. I can't assume I know everything. And I've been reading books by someone else's perspective to understand. I've listened to videos from both sides of the aisle. I've been reading and trying to understand and trying to decode what people are saying and understand their experiences and how the past influences the present. I really take the time to understand. I just want to rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. And to be generous, to open up my life and just say, I just want to listen. Instead of starting with your opinion, why don't you just start with a question? Why is this so important to you? Try another question. What's it been like living in America? How about a third one? What are you concerned about? And instead of arguing and fighting, just listen. Because look what Paul says. Remember the word peaceful? Bless those who persecute you. Don't curse them. How do you pray for people with whom you disagree? Do you pray for them? Do you pray for people that you don't like who disagree with you on this? How can you live in peace? Do all that you can to live in peace. Protest without violence. How can you ever thought of that maybe you could change somebody's heart by loving them? Which is a real interesting question, right? How do you love a racist? But what did Paul say about your enemies? If they're hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. Let your kindness burn into their conscience. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't speak up, because I think we should. I think you should express your voice. But I'm asking you, how can you do it in a way that is loving, that is humble, and that is peaceful? I mean, don't we make monuments for people who could engage these type of issues in humility, peace, and love? We like to forget the rest, don't we? What about politics? Have you had a conversation with somebody who says, I have, right? Because I got a lot of people in the church and a lot of friends. And what I've heard is, if you vote for, now, insert, I don't care who the candidate is. If you vote for, insert candidate's name, you are what's wrong with this world. You're undermining our society. You're disrespecting people. You're stupid. Or the other one I get often is, if you're a thoughtful Christian, then you'd be conservative. If you were a thoughtful, caring Christian, you'd be liberal. And we make these big statements. But what about Paul's advice? Take delight in honoring one another. Live in harmony with each other. Do all you can to live in peace with everyone. I want to say this to those who choose to follow Jesus. These are teachings from one of our greatest leaders, an expectation that he has for people who follow Jesus Christ. And in his world, he had controversial issues all over the place, and he was often in the center of them. And he's telling us to live in peace with one another. You know what I think? I think that as Christians, we shouldn't be known for the person we voted for. Let me say that again. As Christians, I don't think we should be known for the person we voted for. I think we should be known for being the most peaceful, kind, generous, loving, humble people in our society. How about a couple of words of advice, right? On how to state your opinion. Because I honestly think you should state your opinion. It's one of the things about America that I really love is freedom of speech. Okay, you're right. It is a constitutional right to express your freedom. I'm not arguing that. I want to give some advice about how you might think about doing that as a Christian. We could do a whole series of messages on this, right? But here's just a couple of things. Spend time with this passage. I don't care what the issue is you're struggling with. If it's coronavirus, if it's racism, if it's politics, whatever the issue is, and you're just wrestling and struggling with somebody who's on the other side of the aisle from you, and it's like a difficult relationship that you're trying to manage, how can you find peace with all of this? Start by just really thinking through this passage before you have a conversation with anybody. Before you post somebody, talk to somebody. Really sit in this passage. Let God speak to you. Pray over every word in it. Bring up the names of people you're struggling with as you read it, reread it, read it, and reread it. Matter of fact, I mentioned earlier that the Bible, that our English Bibles, there's many different versions of it because they're all translations from the Greek and the Hebrew, the original language. Read it in different versions. That's what I love about the Bible app. You've got dozens of translations that you could read to get nuances on the words, and you might find something really striking. So spend time in this passage. Second word of advice, please don't work your problems out on social media. I think that's a horrible idea. I just think it's a horrible idea. Do you understand the arguments that people are having on social media over these issues is like a screaming match in the mall at Christmas time? You avoid those people. It's embarrassing if you're at the mall and two adults get into a screaming match with each other in front of everyone else. I honestly think some of us should be embarrassed at the way we argue over issues on Facebook, treat each other on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever it is. Here's some advice. If you feel strongly about it, personal message or email. Just be thoughtful, and here's what I would tell you to do. Write out what you feel. Don't send it. Sit on it. Reread it. Soften it. Still keep your points in there. Don't send it. Ask a friend, someone that you really care about, who is wise in your opinion, and say, hey, would you read this before I email this, before I message this? Start there. Or better yet, pick up the phone and call. You know the device you use for texting? Believe it or not, you can talk on that. Hear the person's voice. It changes the course of the conversation often, right? Because when you write something and you throw it out into space, you're not thinking about there's a person there. I once got a 3-page single-spaced letter of a person who visited our church once and spent 80% of the content criticizing the way we run worship. And then put his name and phone number down. So I called him. He was blown away that I called him. We spent 20 minutes on the phone. By the end of the conversation, we were laughing. I read from his letter what he wrote, and if I were in a room with him, I know he would be cringing. He laughed and he goes, I really put that in writing? I'm like, I'm quoting you. And then he apologized. And we didn't agree on everything, but there was a lot of respect by the end of the conversation. Or here's an even better idea than calling. Look them in the face. FaceTime or Zoom, or if you feel comfortable, go grab a cup of coffee outside. You understand that nonverbal cues are essential to a conversation and can often manage it. If you see somebody, you can pick up the emotions and you can manage the conversation better. So just be thoughtful. Just don't do it on social media. Here's the thing. It's a third piece of advice. Ask questions, withhold your opinion. So you know what? Opinion means you know everything you need to know about the situation in order to state what you believe. I am a guy who has lots of conversations with people who express their opinion. Very few people start with a question. And you know who I respect the most? The people who start with questions. Because questions display humility and lead to wisdom. Questions come from humility, and wisdom comes from listening. And you know, the people that would come and they would meet with me and say, hey, help me understand. Why are you preaching this way? Talk to me more. Help me understand more about the direction we're going as a church, because I don't understand. Can you explain to me about what you meant when you said? We may not always agree, but we have incredible conversations. I just think when you start with an opinion, it's prideful. When you start with a question, it's humble. When you speak, you're not listening. When you listen, you'll be wiser for it. And how about this? How about treating everyone with dignity? Yeah, I know that's hard, because I know we are some passionate people on some of these issues we face. And some of these issues are really critical issues. The issues of race are extremely important. But the conversations that I admire the most are the ones where we treat one another with dignity. Where we don't start to diminish one another as a human being. Where we look at another person and we think, this individual is part of God's handiwork. Crafted by God. Now maybe they might be a masterpiece of God in need of restoration and a lot of work, but they're still a handicraft. They're still crafted by God. And if they say they follow Christ, then I should take them as a family member. a brother or sister of Christ. Imagine if we treated everyone with dignity, even those who don't treat us like that. Don't you respect somebody who can show dignity towards others? Here's the last word of advice. Last word of advice. Pray by name for the person who offends you. That's what I do. So I've been here 30 years. And there's a lot of people that have been difficult and have moved on. And sometimes it really hurts, the things they say, the actions they've taken. I've been the subject of letter writing campaigns and people who've made very loud proclamations about me in public places and a lot of things that we work out. And so I start always by praying when I'm flooded with anger, when all my thoughts are going in the wrong direction and I'm just so mad at this person. I really try to get to a place where I say, God bless them. Isn't that hard? Isn't it hard? God bless them. Because I start with this in my mind. As difficult as this person has been to me, how difficult have I been to God? And yet he loves me. And so I've learned over the years, one of the ways I pray is like, God, show mercy on this person. Show mercy on them, Lord. Lead them, God. Lead them to a place where they can experience you in all of your fullness. You be the one who does justice, God, not me. And help me to trust you with that. Because this is what I believe. I believe that praying for someone is a form of love. And praying for your enemies is a way of imitating Jesus. Because I always think Jesus asked God to forgive the people who put him on the cross while he was hanging on it. So how are we doing? You still watching? Or have you shut off and walked away? Am I the difficult relationship right now? All right. But before you argue with me, just remember all the things I just said. Before you flood my inbox or my text or demand a meeting with me, just think about the advice I just gave you, okay? And then, if you want to talk, of course we can talk. But how about I pray? Let's go there. God, I want to pray. God, I want to pray your blessing on everyone who sees this. That your Spirit would bring understanding, would carve our character, would forge us in godliness to help us stand out in the world. God, I just believe that the Christians who are peaceful, loving, humble, generous, and empathetic bring honor to you. So God, help us to be a people that during this heavy time in our society of great controversy and polarizing issues, help us to be people who are known for our love. People who love radically, who live generously, so that we can watch Jesus do something extraordinary through us. Amen.